The ground beneath your feet is not always as solid as it seems. For centuries, people have witnessed land that appears to move on its own, defying explanation and sparking legends of supernatural forces at work. From boulders that slide across deserts without any visible push to islands that drift freely across lakes, these phenomena have baffled historians and scientists alike. In this video, you will discover the hidden mechanics behind these mysterious movements, uncovering the surprising natural and human-made processes that make land seem alive. We will explore how ice, wind, and water bring stones to life, why entire cemeteries appear to shift over time, and what causes solid ground to suddenly liquefy and flow. What do you think is the most compelling explanation for land that moves on its own? Death Valley's racetrack playa presents one of the most visually arresting puzzles on Earth. Here on a vast, flat lakebed, heavy rocks seem to have taken a stroll, carving long, meandering trails into the cracked mud with no sign of what pushed them. For generations, the only witnesses were the trails themselves, silent evidence of a motion no one had ever seen. This led to all sorts of speculative theories, from powerful magnetic fields pulling the stones to pranksters playing an elaborate, long-running joke. The true explanation, however, is far more elegant and relies on a perfect and very rare alignment of natural events. It begins with a winter rain, a rare but crucial event in the desert. This rainfall floods the playa, creating a shallow, temporary lake. The stones sitting on the surface become surrounded by water, which then seeps into the clay below, creating a soft, saturated mud. Then, on a cold night, that shallow pool of water freezes into thin, clear sheets of ice around each rock. When the sun rises and temperatures climb, this ice begins to melt and break apart into large floating panels. Now, a gentle breeze is all that is needed. The wind catches these floating sheets of ice, which then act like tiny, natural bulldozer blades. They push against the rocks, sliding them effortlessly across the now incredibly slick surface of the wet clay. The movement is slow, deliberate, and leaves behind those iconic trails as the stones plow through the soft mud. Once the water evaporates and the playa dries out, all that remains is the evidence, the mysterious trails, while the ice and the wind, the true culprits, vanish without a trace. This delicate choreography of water, ice, and wind shows that even the most supernatural-seeming events often have a beautifully simple physical explanation. But what if the land itself is not solid ground, but a floating tapestry of life? Across the world, from the ancient waters of Loktak Lake in India to the vast sud marshes of the Nile River, islands drift with a mind of their own. These are not anchored landmasses, but incredible floating rafts, entire ecosystems that have broken free from the lakebed to wander the water's surface. They are formed over centuries as layer upon layer of vegetation, peat, and soil build up into a dense, buoyant mat. Eventually, this mat becomes so thick and cohesive that it detaches from the bottom, becoming a mobile piece of real estate. The mechanics behind their buoyancy are a marvel of natural engineering. As the plant matter on these islands decomposes, it releases gases like methane that become trapped within the dense root systems and spongy peat, acting like natural flotation devices. The roots themselves weave a tight net that holds everything together and traps pockets of air, keeping the entire structure afloat. These living islands can be surprisingly sturdy, supporting not just grasses and shrubs, but full-sized trees, wildlife, and for generations, even human communities. People have historically used these drifting lands for fishing bases, for fertile soil to grow crops, and as secluded hiding places during times of conflict. Their movement is not random, but a slow, graceful dance dictated by lake currents, shifting winds, and seasonal water levels. One day, an island might be nestled against the shore, and the next, it could be discovered far out in the center of the lake, a testament to the hidden, dynamic life of the landscape itself. The same forces that move islands can also stir the earth of the dead. In certain old cemeteries, a deeply unsettling phenomenon has been recorded, where coffins are discovered dramatically shifted from their original positions, sometimes stacked against walls or turned completely upside down. This has understandably fueled centuries of folklore about restless spirits and supernatural vengeance. Perhaps the most famous of all these cases is the Chase Vault in Barbados. In the early 1800s, this family vault was opened multiple times for new burials, and each time the heavy lead coffins inside were found in complete disarray, as if thrown about by an invisible, furious hand. The vault was sealed, the floor was covered in sand to capture footprints, and guards were even posted, yet the coffins continued to move. The mystery terrified the local population and baffled investigators for years. So what was truly happening inside that sealed stone chamber? The most plausible explanation is a startlingly simple combination of physics and weather. During the island's torrential rainy seasons, water would likely seep into the vault, flooding the chamber. A sealed coffin, especially one made of lead, is essentially an airtight container. If water levels rose high enough, these coffins would become buoyant, essentially turning into submarines. They would float on the floodwaters, bobbing and drifting freely in the confined space. Then, when the water eventually receded through evaporation or drainage, the coffins would not settle back into their neat, original positions. Instead, they would land haphazardly, often in a jumbled pile, creating the shocking scene that awaited the next mourner. Other factors could contribute to similar mysteries elsewhere. Expansive soils that swell with moisture can slowly shift objects buried within them over time. Minor seismic activity, tremors too faint for people to feel, could also jostle and rearrange heavy objects in an underground space. And of course, one cannot entirely rule out the possibility of human intervention, whether as a prank, a theft, or an attempt to create a legend. This particular mystery is a powerful reminder of how our instinct to find a story, a reason, often leads us to the supernatural, when the true answer is often hidden in the quiet, relentless mechanics of the natural world. While coffins shift in sealed tombs, entire mountainsides can begin a slow, deliberate crawl toward the valley below. This is the world of landslides, where Earth itself becomes a fluid, driven by hidden triggers that build up force over decades or unleash their power in an instant. We often picture these events as sudden cataclysms, triggered by a powerful earthquake or a period of intense rainfall that saturates the ground. And while that is true for many, some of the most fascinating landslides are the ones that move almost imperceptibly, a silent, creeping migration of soil and rock that can bend trees, crack roads, and tilt fences over many years. This slow-motion drama is governed by a constant battle between two invisible forces. The first is sheer stress, which is simply the downhill pull of gravity, always trying to drag the slope toward the valley. The second is the slope's sheer strength, its internal resistance, which is like the glue holding everything together. This strength comes from the friction between soil particles and the cohesion of the clay and silt. The stability of any hillside is a fragile balance between these two opposing powers. What tips that balance is often water. When rain soaks into the ground, it increases the pore pressure, which is the pressure of water trapped in the tiny spaces between soil grains. Think of it like a sandcastle. Dry sand can hold a steep shape, but the moment you add water, it loses its strength and slumps on a massive scale. That is exactly what happens to a slope. High pore pressure pushes the soil grains apart, reducing friction and effectively turning a solid hillside into a slippery, unstable slurry, ready to flow. This hidden hydraulic pressure is a primary driver behind both fast and slow landslides. One of the most tragic examples of this phenomenon was the Vajont Dam Disaster in Italy in 1963. Engineers were aware of the unstable mountain slope adjacent to the new reservoir, but they tragically underestimated the power of pore pressure. As the reservoir was filled and then drained, the changing water levels seeped deep into the mountain, destabilizing the ancient clay layers within. This caused a catastrophic landslide, where over 260 million cubic meters of rock and earth slid into the reservoir at nearly 70 miles per hour. The impact generated a wave that soared over the dam, wiping out several towns downstream and claiming the lives of nearly 2,000 people. This event stands as a somber lesson in the vital importance of understanding these hidden mechanics. By studying the slow creep of soil and the silent buildup of water pressure, geologists can now better predict these risks, helping to mitigate tragedies and reminding us that the ground we build on is never truly still. Perhaps the most unsettling movement of land is when the very earth beneath a structure simply gives way, not in a slow creep, but in a sudden, violent liquefaction. This is the domain of quick clay, a deceptive material that behaves like solid ground until a single trigger transforms it into a flowing slurry. Found in regions like Norway, Canada, and Sweden, these clays are the remnants of ancient seafloors, land that was raised above the water level by geological forces over thousands of years. Their secret lies in their unique chemistry and structure. When these fine clay particles were originally deposited in salt water, the salt acted like a glue, helping the particles to form a stable, honeycomb-like structure that could bear immense weight. But after the land rose and freshwater from rain and snow began to seep through, it slowly washed the salt away. Without that salty glue, the clay particles are held together by an incredibly weak electrical bond. In its undisturbed state, this structure can still feel solid and support forests, roads, and even entire neighborhoods. But if the clay is shaken by a vibration, say from a small earthquake or even construction work, or undercut by erosion from a riverbank, that delicate structure instantly collapses. The clay loses all its strength in a chain reaction, and in a matter of seconds, what was solid ground becomes a heavy, liquid paste that can flow like milk. The Risa landslide in Norway in 1978 provides a stark, documented example. A farmer was simply digging near the edge of a clay deposit when a small section gave way. That minor disturbance was all it took to initiate a catastrophic failure. The liquefaction spread rapidly across the landscape, and over the course of a few hours, an entire farm was consumed as over 3 million cubic meters of clay slid into the nearby fjord. The event was even caught on film, offering a terrifying glimpse into the sheer speed and power of this phenomenon. It is a powerful reminder that the ground's stability is not always a question of what we see on the surface, but of hidden histories written in salt and freshwater, a fragile equilibrium that can be broken in a heartbeat. Human ingenuity can also create the illusion of a living landscape. Deep within the sandstone canyons of Jordan lies the ancient city of Petra, a place where the very rock seems to have been commanded to move by human will. The Nabateans, the master builders of this rose-red city, were not just brilliant architects, they were hydraulic engineers of the highest order. They carved elaborate channels, dams, and cisterns to control the scarce desert water, and they may have used that same water to bring their stone city to life. Historians and archaeologists have long studied the evidence for moving platforms or even massive stone doors within the royal tombs and temples. The theory suggests that these great structures were not static, but could be raised or slid into place using sophisticated systems powered by water. Imagine a hidden network of channels carved directly into the cliff face, designed to collect rainwater or direct spring flow into a large, hidden reservoir behind a facade. This stored water could then be released on command, its weight and pressure channeled through precise conduits to operate counterweights, pulleys, or even water screws. A heavy stone platform, perhaps for presenting a religious icon or a ruler during a ceremony, could have been slowly and majestically elevated by the relentless force of flowing water, creating a breathtaking spectacle of divine power for those gathered below. This was not magic, but a profound application of physics. The Nabateans possessed an intimate understanding of their environment, knowing how to harness the desert's rare rains to create miracles of motion. Their work blurs the line between the natural movement of land and the engineered movement of stone, reminding us that some of history's greatest mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but testimonies to the incredible creativity of humankind. Far to the north, another silent and powerful force is perpetually reshaping the land. Permafrost, a layer of ground that remains completely frozen for at least 2 consecutive years, locks vast stretches of the Arctic in a seemingly permanent grip. Yet this frozen ground is not still. It is the stage for a relentless, cyclical dance driven by the expansion and contraction of water. This process is called frost heave, and it is a fundamental mechanic of the polar regions. It begins with a small pocket of unfrozen, water-saturated soil trapped within the permafrost. When the temperature drops, this water freezes. But water does not simply turn to ice, it expands, increasing in volume by about 9%. This expansion creates tremendous upward pressure, pushing against everything above it: soil, rocks, even man-made foundations. This force is so powerful it can lift massive boulders upward, as if the earth itself is giving birth to stones. Then, when temperatures rise again during a brief summer thaw, the ice melts and the ground subsides, but nothing returns to exactly the same place. The rocks and soil settle back down at a slight angle, shifted from their original positions. This freeze-thaw cycle repeats countless times over seasons and centuries, each tiny, incremental movement accumulating into a dramatic rearrangement of the entire landscape. This slow-motion churning creates some of the Arctic's most distinctive patterns. It pushes stones into orderly circles and polygons, as if a giant hand has carefully arranged them. It creates hummocks, which are small, rounded mounds of earth that dot the tundra, and it can even form massive, ice-filled bumps called pingos that rise like domes from the flat terrain. For engineers, frost heave presents a formidable challenge. Roads buckle and warp, pipelines are stressed and risk rupture, and building foundations crack and become unstable as the very ground they stand on breathes with the seasons. This is not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, inexorable force that demonstrates how even the most solid-looking ground is dynamic, moved by the hidden, powerful mechanics of water and ice. Even the most stable-looking ground can be transformed into a churning, bubbling fountain of earth. Mud volcanoes are among the planet's most dynamic and misunderstood geological features, places where the land does not just creep or slide, but actively erupts. Found in regions like Azerbaijan, which is home to nearly a third of the world's total, these formations are not true volcanoes of molten rock, but rather vents for pressurized mud, water, and gases from deep within the Earth's crust. They build themselves from the ground up, quite literally, creating cones and craters that can grow, shift, and even wander across the landscape over time. The driving force behind this movement is immense subsurface pressure. often generated by the compression of hydrocarbon deposits like methane gas or by the relentless grinding of tectonic plates far below. This pressure seeks a path of least resistance, forcing a slurry of water and fine sediment upward until it breaches the surface in a constant, slow ooze or, in dramatic events, a sudden explosive geyser of mud. This relentless outflow constructs the volcano's cone, while the shifting pressures underground can cause the entire structure to inflate, deflate, or even move laterally by several meters in a single year. To communities living nearby, these features have long been sources of both awe and peril. They have been misinterpreted as the breath of buried monsters, the work of angered deities, or portals to other worlds. The reality is a fascinating interplay of fluid dynamics and geology. The hazards are very real. A mud volcano can swallow buildings, roads, and farmland without warning as the liquefied earth simply gives way. Yet these same eruptions also offer valuable clues, acting as natural drill holes that bring up samples from depths we could never otherwise reach, helping geologists locate untapped energy resources. The constant, self-driven reshaping of these muddy landscapes is a powerful demonstration that our planet is not a static entity, but a living, breathing system where even the soil beneath our feet can be set into motion by the immense forces hidden deep below. Yet the mystery of moving stones is not confined to a single California desert. On the high, arid plains of Argentina's Altiplano, another population of sailing stones makes its slow journey, guided by a different set of natural laws. Here, the stage is a vast salt flat, a brilliant white expanse where the surface crust is a complex mosaic of crystalline patterns. After a rare rain, this crust becomes a slick, low-friction surface, a perfect slide for any object placed upon it. But the true engine of movement here is the wind, which screams across the open plateau with relentless force, pushing even moderately sized rocks across the glistening, saline landscape. The mechanics are simpler than the ice raft theory of Death Valley, but no less fascinating, proving that nature often finds multiple paths to the same wondrous outcome. Meanwhile, in the volcanic deserts of Iceland, the puzzle gains new layers of complexity. The stones here rest on a substrate of black sand and volcanic ash, a terrain that behaves differently than clay or salt. Researchers suspect that the intense freeze-thaw cycles of the North Atlantic, combined with strong winds and perhaps even the unique moisture retention of the ash itself, all conspire to nudge these rocks into motion. To solve these global puzzles, scientists have turned to modern tools, embedding tiny GPS trackers inside stones and setting up automated time-lapse cameras to capture every subtle shift. What they have discovered is that the triggers for movement are often incredibly slight. A barely perceptible tilt in the ground can give a stone the initial momentum it needs. In some cases, a thin, slippery microbial mat of cyanobacteria growing on the desert floor can provide the perfect low-friction surface for a rock to begin its slide under the persistent push of the wind. These wandering stones have become powerful symbols of a greater truth. They represent the patient, incremental power of nature's subtle forces, where the smallest change in the environment can set seemingly immovable objects on a journey. What once seemed like magic is now revealed as a complex, beautiful, and entirely physical dance, one that only requires our patience and observation to understand. Even the most magnificent cities are not immune to the slow, sinking feeling of the earth giving way. This is the phenomenon of subsidence, a gradual or sometimes sudden sinking of the ground that can tilt towers, crack foundations, and create the eerie illusion that the very city is slowly descending. The mechanics are a matter of lost support, of something vital being removed from beneath the surface, causing the land above to compact, settle, or even collapse into the void. In some cases, the culprit is entirely natural. Karst landscapes, for instance, are underlain by soluble bedrock like limestone or gypsum. Over millennia, slightly acidic rainwater seeps into the ground, dissolving the rock and carving out vast, hidden networks of caves and conduits. The land surface above remains stable, held up by a fragile ceiling, until the moment that ceiling can no longer support its own weight. Then, without warning, the ground can open up, swallowing everything above in a sinkhole. But human activity has dramatically accelerated this process in many parts of the world. The relentless extraction of groundwater for drinking, agriculture, and industry is like deflating a giant subterranean water balloon. The water trapped between soil grains doesn't just sit there, it actually helps to hold the ground up, providing structural support. When that water is pumped out, the soil particles are forced closer together, and the entire ground layer compacts and sinks. This is the primary engine behind the dramatic subsidence in places like Mexico City, which was built on the soft, clay-rich bed of an ancient lake. As the city has drawn down its aquifers, some areas have sunk by more than 30 feet over the past century. The result is a surreal urban landscape where buildings lean at odd angles, staircases no longer meet their doorways, and the ground floors of historic structures have effectively become basements. Venice faces a similar, though more complex, fate, battling a combination of groundwater extraction, the natural compaction of its founding sediments, and the rising sea levels that make the sinking so much more apparent. History is filled with societies adapting to this relentless shift, from the ingenious floating foundations of ancient structures to the modern engineering marvel of injecting water and other materials back underground to re-inflate the compressed aquifers. We are constantly reminded that the ground we build upon is a dynamic system, not a permanent stage. Our eyes can be tricked into seeing landscapes that are not truly there. In the vast emptiness of a desert or the thin air of a high mountain peak, the atmosphere itself can become a projector, casting shimmering, impossible images onto the horizon. These are mirages, not mere figments of imagination, but powerful optical illusions created by the physics of light traveling through layers of air at different temperatures. When the ground is intensely hot, it superheats the air just above it, creating a steep temperature gradient. Light rays bending through these layers can produce a convincing illusion of a distant oasis or a pool of water on the highway ahead. But some mirages are far more complex and dramatic. The Fata Morgana is a particularly stunning example, named after the enchantress Morgan Le Fay from Arthurian legend for its magical, castle-like appearances. This phenomenon occurs when there are alternating warm and cold layers of air near the surface, acting like a lens that distorts and stretches objects on the horizon. A simple boat far out at sea can be magnified and inverted, appearing as a towering, floating city. A distant coastline can seem to levitate above the water, its cliffs and structures warping into fantastic shapes that shift and ripple before a witness's eyes. For centuries, sailors and desert travelers documented these visions, often interpreting them as divine signs, enchanted islands, or omens. Similarly, the Brocken Spectre, a ghostly apparition seen on misty mountain ridges, is another atmospheric marvel. When a climber stands with the sun behind them and looks down into a bank of fog, their own shadow is projected onto the misty droplets. The light diffracts around the shadow, often creating a colorful halo and making the figure appear monstrously large and at a great distance. As the fog bank shifts and moves with the wind, the giant spectre appears to glide across the landscape, mimicking the observer's every move in an eerie, silent dance. These experiences feel profoundly supernatural, yet they are born from the simple, predictable behavior of light and water vapor. They remind us that our perception is not a perfect window to reality, but an interpretation filtered through the conditions of our world. By unraveling the science behind these illusions, we do not diminish their wonder. We simply exchange a mystery of magic for a deeper appreciation of the intricate and beautiful mechanics of our atmosphere. The living world itself is a quiet but relentless architect of the land. While we search the skies for answers or dig deep for geological forces, some of the most persistent movement is driven by the smallest creatures right under our feet. Consider the humble earthworm, an animal so common we rarely consider its power. As it burrows, it aerates the soil, but it also shifts enormous quantities of earth over time. A large population of worms can literally turn over the entire top layer of soil in a field within a few years, a constant, churning process that subtly rearranges the ground's surface and everything lying upon it. On a much larger scale, prairie dog towns are masterpieces of subterranean engineering. Their extensive tunnel networks honeycomb the prairies, moving tons of soil and creating a hidden labyrinth that can weaken the ground above. These tunnels can eventually collapse, creating sudden sinkholes that alter the topography in an instant. The plants we walk past every day are just as active. A tree's roots are not just anchors, they are powerful hydraulic tools that seek out water, prying apart cracks in bedrock with immense force as they grow. Over decades, this slow pressure can fracture stone and destabilize entire hillsides, contributing to the slow creep of soil down a slope. But when that tree dies, its roots decay, leaving behind empty tunnels and a loss of structural integrity that can trigger a small landslide. This cycle of growth and decay is a constant, silent negotiation with gravity. Yet life does not only destroy or destabilize, it also builds. In coastal wetlands and river deltas, plants like mangroves and reeds are essential land builders. Their dense, tangled root systems act as a net, capturing sediment suspended in the water. With each passing tide, more silt and sand are trapped, gradually building up the land around the plants and extending the shoreline further into the water. This is land created by life itself. However, this process is a delicate balance. If those plants die off, perhaps due to pollution or changing water levels, that same root network decays. The land they built loses its binding grip, and the once solid ground can quickly subside back into the water, a sinking caused not by geology alone, but by the absence of life. These biological forces operate on a timescale that is almost invisible to us, but their cumulative effect is immense. They remind us that the ground is not a passive stage, but an active participant in a conversation with every worm, every root, and every blade of grass. Some of the most powerful forces shaping our world are the ones we never feel. Deep beneath the surface, tectonic plates are in constant, grinding motion, their edges locked in a struggle that usually only makes itself known in the violent release of an earthquake. But along certain fault lines, this immense pressure finds a different outlet, a silent, relentless slide known as tectonic creep. Imagine a fence line built straight and true across a property. Over the course of a decade, a subtle but undeniable bend appears in the middle, as if the posts are slowly being pushed out of alignment by an invisible hand. This is the signature of creep. It is the gradual, aseismic shift along a fault, a motion that happens without any significant shaking or rumbling. It is the earth moving in its sleep. The San Andreas Fault in California is a prime stage for this phenomenon. Here, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate are sliding past one another, and in certain sections they do not stick and then break in a catastrophic quake. Instead, they simply keep slipping millimeter by millimeter, year after year. This slow dance steadily warps anything built across its path. Roads develop subtle curves, pipelines are stressed, and sidewalks crack and shift. While it lacks the drama of an earthquake, creep is no less powerful. It is the same titanic force, simply expressed with patience instead of fury. Scientists meticulously monitor this movement using everything from century-old survey markers to modern, hyper-precise GPS stations. By tracking these infinitesimal shifts, they gain crucial insights into how stress is building up in the sections of the fault that are locked, helping to refine our understanding of seismic risk. This relentless, unseen motion is a profound reminder that the ground we perceive as solid and permanent is part of a dynamic system, a planet that is always rearranging itself one slow, silent step at a time. Even the most placid lake can become a portal to the world's fiery heart. In a few extraordinary places, the water does not rest. It rages, churning and steaming as if the very ground below is coming to a boil. Dominica's boiling lake is the most dramatic example, a flooded fumarole where the water is perpetually shrouded in a thick, rolling mist and the surface bubbles at a near-rolling simmer. For centuries, this terrifying spectacle was interpreted as a supernatural gateway, an entrance to a spirit world or a divine cauldron of creation. The truth is no less wondrous, a direct window into the volcanic forces that shape our planet. The mechanics are a powerful display of geothermal energy. Deep below the lake, a chamber of magma superheats the surrounding rock. Rainwater, which has seeped down through cracks and porous stone, is trapped in this subterranean oven. As this groundwater is heated, it becomes less dense and begins to rise violently back toward the surface, creating powerful convection currents that stir the lake's depths. Meanwhile, cooler water from the edges of the lake sinks down to be heated in turn, perpetuating a continuous, turbulent cycle. This is not a still body of water, but a raging natural pressure cooker. The effect is not just visual. The rising superheated water often carries dissolved gases and minerals from deep within the earth, which are released at the surface, sometimes with enough force to create new vents and alter the shoreline. The lake's size and temperature can fluctuate dramatically based on rainfall and subterranean activity, making it a dynamic, living feature. Similar sites exist across the globe, from the steaming hot springs of Yellowstone to the mud pots of New Zealand, each one a testament to the immense thermal energy constantly radiating from Earth's interior. They are not supernatural, but supernatural, a breathtaking reminder that the ground we stand on is merely a thin crust over a world of immense heat and motion. The stones of Stonehenge did not walk into place on their own. They were coaxed inch by grueling inch across the English landscape by human ingenuity. For millennia, our species has looked at the immovable Earth and asked, what if we could move it? Long before modern machinery, ancient cultures devised brilliant methods to manipulate their world, creating marvels that would later be mistaken for magic. The transportation of megaliths, those enormous stones used in monuments, was a feat of physics and sheer will. The most common theory involves a simple yet effective system of log rollers. Teams would lay down a track of felled trees, placing the massive stone on top. As the stone was pulled forward by ropes, workers at the rear would constantly retrieve the freed logs and rush them to the front, creating a continuous, moving pathway. This method turns an impossible drag across rough ground into a manageable task of rolling friction, but some terrains demanded even more creativity. There is compelling evidence that in certain boggy areas, builders constructed wooden sledges and then lubricated the path ahead with water, turning the earth into a slick mud that drastically reduced the force needed to pull their colossal loads. This practical application of physics, using water to reduce friction, would have appeared miraculous to any observer not in on the secret. These were not supernatural events, but the earliest forms of engineering, a testament to the power of coordinated human labor and an understanding of the natural world. Today, that ambition to shape the land has only grown more sophisticated. We no longer just move stones, we move mountains. Soil nailing is one such modern technique, where long reinforcing bars are drilled deep into unstable slopes to pin the earth in place, preventing landslides and allowing us to build on previously dangerous ground. Even more dramatic is the process of land reclamation, where we quite literally create new land from the sea. Using massive dredges and pipelines, sand and sediment are pumped from the ocean floor to form new, stable ground, expanding coastlines and providing space for cities and airports. From the log-rolling crews of the ancient world to the computer-controlled dredges of today, the story is the same. We see a challenge in the landscape, and we apply creativity and force to overcome it. What was once attributed to gods or giants is now recognized as the signature of human innovation. The sand beneath a dune is never truly still, even when the wind dies down. While the wind provides the visible push, it is often water, hidden deep below, that ultimately decides when and where the dune will finally settle. This unseen partnership between wind and water is the true engine behind the great wandering deserts and shifting coastlines of our world. Think of a single grain of dry sand. It is light, loose, and easily picked up by the slightest breeze. But when that same grain becomes damp, a thin film of water surrounds it, creating a tiny meniscus that acts like a microscopic bridge, binding it to its neighbors. This is cohesion, and it gives wet sand a surprising strength, allowing it to hold a steep slope that dry sand could never manage. This is why you can build a sturdy sandcastle with wet sand, while dry sand simply slips through your fingers. Now scale this up to a massive dune. After a rain, the surface layer becomes damp and cohesive, temporarily locked in place and resistant to the wind's force. The dune appears stable, but below the surface the story continues. The level of the groundwater table beneath the dune is constantly fluctuating. When the water table rises, it saturates the deeper layers of sand from below. This saturation does the opposite of surface dampness. It destroys the sand's internal friction. The grains are suspended in water, losing their grip on one another and becoming a loose, liquefied slurry. This unstable base can no longer support the weight of the dune above. The entire structure is primed for collapse, and when a strong wind finally arrives, it does not just move surface grains, it can trigger a massive slumping of the entire dune face, causing it to advance rapidly across the landscape. We can see this dramatic interplay on the coast of Oregon, where the relentless moisture from the Pacific Ocean and winter rains constantly alters the internal stability of massive dunes, allowing them to march inland and swallow forests. Similarly, at the edges of the Sahara, the rare but torrential rains are just as important as the constant wind in the desert's slow, relentless expansion. By understanding this hidden hydraulic dance, scientists and engineers can better predict dune migration, planting vegetation to lower water tables and stabilize the sand, or strategically using moisture to anchor critical dunes and protect coastal towns from being slowly, silently buried by the moving earth. Even the slowest river can move mountains if that river is made of solid ice. Glaciers are not static sheets of frozen water, but colossal rivers of ice in a state of incredibly slow motion. Their journey is driven by the relentless pull of gravity, compelling them to flow downhill at a pace that can be almost imperceptible over a human lifetime, yet unstoppable over centuries. This movement is not a simple slide, but a complex process of internal deformation. The immense weight of the ice, hundreds of meters thick, creates such enormous pressure that the ice crystals at the bottom actually bend, stretch, and flow like a viscous putty, allowing the entire mass to ooze forward. This internal flow is complemented by basal sliding, where meltwater at the glacier's base lubricates its passage over the underlying rock. The evidence of this powerful, grinding motion is written across the landscapes they leave behind. As a glacier advances, it acts like a gargantuan piece of sandpaper, scouring and polishing the bedrock into smooth, flowing shapes. It carves deep, U-shaped valleys out of what were once V-shaped river canyons and plucks massive boulders from the mountainsides, carrying them along for the ride. When the climate shifts and the glacier finally retreats, it drops its cargo of crushed rock and sediment in long ridges called moraines, which mark the glacier's former boundaries like bathtub rings. But the movement does not end when the ice is gone. The land itself, once crushed down by the staggering weight of the ice, begins to rebound upward in a process known as isostatic adjustment. It is a delayed reaction, a slow motion springing back that continues for thousands of years after the glacier has melted, gradually lifting coastlines and reshaping continents. This is why we find marine fossils on mountaintops and ancient shorelines far inland. The legacy of these icy giants is everywhere, from the deep fjords of Norway to the Great Lakes of North America. They are a reminder that the most powerful changes often happen not in a sudden crash, but in a patient, persistent push that literally moves the world. The desert can sometimes hum a low, resonant tune. Among the most haunting and beautiful auditory mysteries is the phenomenon of singing sands, where entire dunes produce deep, booming vibrations or ethereal musical notes when the sand is disturbed. This is not the gentle whisper of wind over a dune, but a powerful, sustained hum that can be felt deep in your chest, a sound so unexpected it feels like the landscape itself has found a voice. For travelers and ancient cultures who encountered these sonic events, the experience was profoundly supernatural. The sounds were attributed to desert demons calling from beneath the earth, the mournful songs of buried spirits, or the enchanting but dangerous music of sirens luring the unwary deeper into the barren wastes. The true explanation, however, lies in the precise physics of countless grains of sand moving in perfect unison. The key is a very specific type of sand grain, typically well-rounded and between 0.1 and 0.5 millimeters in diameter. These grains must also be free of dust and possess a coating of certain silicate minerals, a recipe found in only a handful of deserts and beaches around the world. When a layer of this sand is set in motion, either by a slumping avalanche down the steep face of a dune or even by the simple drag of a hand across its surface, the grains begin to slide over one another. They do not move randomly but fall into a synchronized oscillation, vibrating against their neighbors in a cascading wave. This collective movement generates a very pure acoustic frequency, much like the bow of a violin drawing a consistent note from a string. The entire dune acts as a massive natural amplifier, with the dry, loose sand below the thin, moving surface layer acting as a resonance chamber that projects the sound across the landscape. Humidity is the great silencer. Even a small amount of moisture in the air or clinging to the sand grains themselves dampens the vibrations and prevents the synchronization from occurring. This is why these dunes often sing loudest in the heat of the day, when the air is at its driest. To stand on the crest of the Kelso Dunes in California's Mojave Desert and trigger a small avalanche is to conduct the Earth's orchestra, eliciting a deep, groaning boom that can last for several minutes. At the Singing Sand Mountain in China, known as Mingsha Shan, the sound is said to resemble the distant beat of drums and the strumming of zithers. These places transform the land from a silent, static stage into a dynamic instrument, proving that the mysteries of our planet are not just visual, but deeply sensory, heard as well as seen. A volcano breathes, the ground around it swells and subsides in a slow, rhythmic pulse, a direct reflection of the immense forces churning in the chambers below. This is not a metaphor, but a precise mechanical process. Deep beneath the summit, a magma chamber begins to fill with molten rock rising from the Earth's mantle. The pressure inside this subterranean reservoir builds, and like overinflating a balloon, this pressure must go somewhere. It pushes upward, forcing the entire overlying structure, the mountain itself, to bulge and rise, sometimes by several meters. This gradual uplift, known as volcanic inflation, is one of the most reliable warning signs that a volcano is stirring, that its internal plumbing is pressurizing. Scientists now monitor this minute ground movement with incredible precision, using networks of GPS stations and satellite radar that can detect shifts of mere millimeters. This swelling is the mountain taking a deep breath before the explosive exhale of an eruption. Then, when the eruption occurs and the magma is expelled onto the surface or into new underground pathways, the pressure is suddenly released. The support is gone, and the ground above the now emptied chamber collapses inward, causing widespread subsidence. The mountain deflates. Perhaps the most famous example of this constant, living motion is the Yellowstone caldera, a supervolcano whose surface is in a perpetual state of adjustment. The land there rises and falls due to the complex interplay of magma movement and the boiling hydrothermal systems just below the surface. Throughout history, witnesses to these ground shifts had no such scientific framework. They saw the earth cracking and swelling near a volcano and interpreted it as a dire omen, a sign of an angered god. Today, we understand it as a critical data point in the science of eruption forecasting. By reading the subtle language of the rising and falling land, volcanologists can better understand a volcano's mood, providing precious time to warn populations living in the shadow of these sleeping giants. A single tremor can rewrite the map of an entire region in seconds. The raw energy of an earthquake is a brutal sculptor, capable of immediate and terrifying transformations of the landscape. When a fault ruptures, the ground itself can tear open, with one side lurching several meters past the other in an instant. This sudden displacement can rip roads in half, offset fences, and create brand new cliffs or depressions where none existed before. But the surface rupture is often just the beginning of the chaos. The real danger can come from the shaking itself, which sends powerful seismic waves radiating out from the epicenter, turning seemingly stable ground into a deadly, unpredictable fluid. This process is called liquefaction, and it occurs in areas with loose, water-saturated sand and silt. The intense vibration from the quake increases the water pressure between the soil grains, forcing them apart and causing the solid ground to lose all its strength. It behaves like quicksand, and anything built upon it, from buildings to bridges, can tilt, sink, or simply collapse as the earth turns to soup beneath its foundations. Beyond these immediate and dramatic effects, earthquakes also set in motion slower, more subtle changes that can reshape the land for years to come. The violent shaking can rearrange entire underground aquifers, altering the flow of water and causing wells to dry up or new springs to burst forth from the ground. It can destabilize vast slopes, not causing an immediate landslide, but weakening them so severely that they give way during the next major rainstorm, sometimes years later. The Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 offers a stark historical lesson. The fault rupture was visible for hundreds of miles, but the fires that followed were fueled by another consequence: the widespread rupture of water mains, which were themselves broken by the violent ground movement. The landscape was not just cracked, it was systematically broken and then burned. By studying these past events, engineers have learned to design for this incredible force. They map liquefaction zones to avoid building critical infrastructure there, and they design flexible foundations and shock absorbers for skyscrapers in seismic regions. Each major quake provides a devastating but invaluable lesson in the hidden vulnerabilities of the ground we trust, revealing how the planet's deepest unrest can reach up to the surface without warning. Yet even this violent rearrangement pales next to a slower, more insidious collapse. The shores of the Dead Sea are dissolving, vanishing into a landscape pockmarked with thousands of sudden, gaping voids. This is not the work of ghosts or giants, but a direct and startling consequence of our own thirst. For decades, the rivers that once fed this ancient, hypersaline lake have been heavily diverted for agriculture and drinking water. The sea itself has been shrinking at an alarming rate, its water level dropping over 1 meter every single year. As the sea recedes, it leaves behind a vast, exposed plain of underground salt deposits, the ancient bed it once covered. This is where the hidden mechanics begin. Rainwater and occasional flash floods, which are fresh and not salty, now seep into this newly uncovered ground. Fresh water acts like a powerful solvent on the salt layers, silently dissolving them and carving out massive, hidden caverns directly beneath the surface. The land above these secret cavities remains held aloft by a fragile crust of hardened mud, forming a precarious roof. It can hold for days, months, or even years, showing no sign of the emptiness below. Then, without any warning, the roof can no longer support its own weight. The ground gives way in a sudden, violent collapse, creating a sinkhole that can be over 10 meters deep and just as wide. These craters appear with terrifying spontaneity, swallowing sections of highway, appearing in the middle of tourist beaches, and cracking the foundations of buildings. The landscape is now so unstable that it is virtually impossible to map the danger. Just because one sinkhole has formed does not mean the area is safe, as the freshwater continues to flow underground, dissolving new salt layers and creating fresh cavities that will collapse on their own schedule. The very ground has become a treacherous, shifting labyrinth. This phenomenon is a profound and unsettling lesson. It demonstrates that our interventions in the environment, even those made far upstream, can set in motion powerful and unpredictable geological chains of events. We are not just drawing down a lake, we are actively unbuilding the land that surrounds it, creating a moving hazard from the earth itself. The wind never rests in the desert, a tireless sculptor with an endless supply of sand. It is the primary artist of these barren landscapes, carving intricate patterns into the rock and building towering dunes that march slowly across the horizon. But its work is not a simple, brute force push. The mechanics of how wind moves sand are a delicate and fascinating dance of physics. It begins with saltation, a process where individual sand grains are lifted just enough by the wind to hop and bounce along the surface. Each of these hopping grains, upon landing, can dislodge others, creating a cascading effect that sets entire fields of sand in motion. The finest particles enter suspension, becoming a permanent part of the air itself as a hazing dust cloud, while larger grains simply creep and roll along the surface, pushed by the constant impacts from their bouncing neighbors. This relentless transport can carry sand across unimaginable distances, slowly grinding down mountain ranges and filling in valleys over millennia. The very paths of human history have been shaped by these aeolian forces. The legendary Silk Road, for instance, was not just a product of human ambition, but also a negotiation with the deserts it crossed. Ancient traders had to navigate shifting dune fields and avoid regions plagued by sandstorms, their routes ultimately dictated by the same wind patterns that built the desert around them. Yet the wind does not work alone. Its power is modulated by a fragile living skin known as biological soil crust, a thin layer of cyanobacteria, lichens, and mosses that binds the sand grains together. When intact, this crust protects the desert floor from erosion, but if it is broken by a single footprint or a vehicle's tire, the wind quickly exploits the weakness, scooping out the loose sand and beginning the process of desertification. By understanding these intricate partnerships between wind, temperature, and life, we can better combat the expansion of deserts and appreciate the silent, persistent force that is forever reshaping the face of our planet. This silent, living skin is the desert's first line of defense. In the world's driest places, a fragile tapestry of moss, lichens, and cyanobacteria weaves itself across the sand, forming a biological crust that holds the very earth together. These unassuming organisms are master engineers, secreting sticky filaments that glue soil particles into a cohesive, rough layer that is far more resistant to the wind's relentless force. They also act like a sponge, absorbing precious dew and rainfall, which helps the entire ecosystem retain moisture and support other forms of life. This delicate crust is what allows complex desert environments to thrive, preventing the landscape from simply blowing away. But this stability is a fragile bargain. A single misplaced footstep, a tire track from an off-road vehicle, or the hooves of grazing livestock can shatter this protective layer, breaking the microbial bonds that took decades or even centuries to form. Once the crust is broken, the wind finds its opening. It quickly scours out the loose sand from the damaged area, creating a deepening depression and launching more sand into the saltation process, which then goes on to bombard and damage adjacent sections of intact crust. This can trigger a devastating feedback loop of erosion, where a tiny initial disturbance can eventually lead to the complete breakdown of the land's surface, transforming a stable plain into a shifting dune field. The threat is magnified by a changing climate, as prolonged droughts and shifting rainfall patterns can stress these biological crusts to their breaking point even without physical contact. The health of this microscopic world is directly tied to the macroscopic stability of the desert itself, a profound reminder that the largest movements of land often begin with the smallest, most delicate forms of life. These once baffling mysteries are now becoming open books, read with the precise eyes of modern technology. We are entering a new era of Earth observation, one where we no longer have to wait for the land to reveal its secrets through catastrophe. Drones now fly over unstable slopes, capturing millimeter-perfect changes in the terrain with every pass. They create intricate three-dimensional maps that show us the slow, silent creep of a hillside long before it gives way. From orbit, satellite-based radar, a technology known as INSAR, measures the subtle inflation of a volcano with astonishing accuracy, detecting how the ground swells by mere centimeters as magma chambers fill deep below. This is the equivalent of seeing a mountain take a single, deep breath from hundreds of miles away. On the ground, networks of GPS sensors and laser scanners, a method called LiDAR, pierce through dense forest canopies to reveal the ancient scars of past landslides and the subtle bulges that hint at future ones. These tools feed a constant stream of data into sophisticated computer models powered by artificial intelligence. The AI doesn't just collect information, it learns from it. It begins to recognize the complex, hidden patterns that precede a disaster, patterns far too subtle for any human to ever discern. It can cross-reference decades of rainfall data with the slightest shifts in a fault line, or correlate tiny tremors with the slow saturation of a clay deposit. This is not just about watching the land move, it is about learning to predict its intentions. This technological leap transforms our relationship with the planet. We are moving from being passive observers of these powerful forces to active interpreters. The same tools that map a creeping landslide can help engineers design better defenses. The data that predicts a volcanic eruption provides the precious time needed to evacuate a city. The models that forecast coastal erosion guide our efforts to restore protective wetlands and build resilient communities. We are beginning to converse with the landscape in its own language of pressure, stress, and strain. This is the ultimate resolution to our historical mysteries. The wandering stones, the shifting graves, the sinking cities, they are no longer supernatural puzzles, but complex physical equations waiting to be solved. Each answered question unlocks a deeper layer of understanding, not just about the ground beneath our feet, but about the dynamic, living system of our entire planet. From sliding stones to shifting continents, the hidden mechanics of land that moves on its own reveal a world in constant, intricate motion. These phenomena, once explained by restless spirits or divine intervention, are now understood through the elegant laws of physics and geology. Yet, knowing the science behind the ice sheets that push boulders or the pore pressure that liquefies a slope does not diminish the wonder. It only deepens our appreciation for the beautiful complexity of our planet. Each mystery solved is a testament to human curiosity and our relentless drive to listen to the stories the Earth is trying to tell us. By exploring these forces, we gain more than just insight into Earth's past. We gather the essential tools to build a safer and more resilient future, learning to live in harmony with a world that is never truly still. So the next time you feel the ground solid beneath your feet, remember the incredible, hidden dance happening just below the surface, a world of silent forces and patient movements. What mysterious landscape captures your imagination the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and wherever you are, keep exploring.